I'm Julie Herman of Jaybird Quilt and Lazy Girl Designs, and welcome back to the Lazy Angle Basics series. This week we're working on the apple pie table runner. And this is the third video in the apple pie table runner. And so far, we've learned how to make our units, we've learned how to make our star blocks, and today I'm going to show you how to put your star blocks together, make your border, and finish your table runner. So let's get started. Directions for piecing the border are on page 8 of your pattern. I made mine scrappy, so I just went ahead and took 3 rectangles, sewed them together to create this unit. If you want yours to have a more planned look and you're concerned about where their fabric's going to go, feel free to lay your rectangles out around your center of your table runner and plan things out. The most important thing to note when making the border is that you want to backstitch at the beginning and the end of these seams. And that's because there's not going to be anything that goes around this until after we quilt it and we put our binding on. So if you take a look at a finished runner like this one, you'll see that the only thing encasing my border here is my binding. So these seams can come apart during quilting if they're not backstitched. So it's best to just do it at the beginning and the end of each one because you don't know when you're making them unless you've planned things out if the piece is going to go like this or if the piece is going to go like this. So I find it easiest to just backstitch at the beginning and the end of each one. So once you go ahead and make 8 of these, you're going to take 2 of them and add corner pieces. And these are going to be for the short ends of your table runner. So you're going to end up with 2 of these. And then you're going to take the remaining 6 and piece them into 2 pieces that are 9 rectangles long. So go ahead and make your border pieces, and I suggest pressing your seams open. Now that I have my 3 blocks done and I have my border done, it's time to put everything together. Directions for sewing my 3 stars together are on page 7 of the pattern. And the important thing to note here is that you want to make sure that these points line up as best as possible when you sew these blocks together. And I'll show you a trick over at the machine. And then after we sew these together, we're going to sew this together, and then the center of our table runner will be complete. Then it's time to go ahead and sew on our top and bottom borders, followed by our right and left borders. And when we're sewing our borders on, it's important to try and get these seams to match up here as best as possible. And we're going to do that with pinning, and I'll show you that at the machine as well. So let's head on over to the machine. As I mentioned over at my cutting area, the most important thing to me when sewing these 2 blocks together are getting these points to match up. Now I could just flip this block on top of this one, pin it, sew my scant 1/4 inch, hope for the best. But if you're worried about your points lining up, I'm going to show you a quick little trick. If you've been around for some of my other sew-alongs, you may already know this one. It's called hang pin. So the idea behind this is we are going to focus on exactly where these points are, and we're going to stick a pin in that is going to hang, and it's going to help us perfectly pin these pieces together. So we're going to go in from the wrong side of the one block at exactly where the point is. Okay, and then we're going to go in from the right side of the other block where the point is. So in this case, we're less worried about where everything else is, and we're more worried about exactly where those 2 points are. And now we are going to kind of hug these pieces together and let that pin hang there, hence the name hang pin. We want to make sure that it's making a perfect plus sign so that, you know, if it's over like this or over like this, things are not going to be lined up when we go to sew everything in place. And now, as you can imagine, we can't really go to the machine right now because this pin is kind of hanging in there in the way. So what we want to do is take 2 additional straight pins and place one on the right and one on the left while we're making sure to not move that pin and keep it perfectly where it is. So now, in theory, when we take that out, those points should be perfectly pinned in place to each other. We can repeat that process over here. So I'm going to find exactly where that pink point is. And this definitely takes more time than just sewing, but if you are having trouble getting accurate points, I have found that this is a really good method for getting accurate points, and it's worth a little bit of extra time in pinning because you have less time of using your seam ripper and taking things apart to get them to line up as best as you want them to. Okay, so again, we have that in there, and I'm going to keep that pin hanging in there. I'm going to grab 2 additional pins, one on either side. And always important to make sure, not 3 pins, 2 pins, that it doesn't wiggle around. And as you can see here, this one here in the front is lower than the one in the back. And that's okay. That's apparently what I need to do to accommodate to make sure that those 2 points line up on top of each other. So now I'm going to take the hang pin out, and I could sew this entire seam, but if I'm a little bit worried and I want to make sure 100% that these are lined up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do stitching about a 1/2 inch on either side of that seam. So I'm just simply going to lift my presser foot, and then you want to make sure you don't sew over pins, so we're going to take those out as we go, and nice and slow, just going to sew to that point and repeat that down here. Make sure my seams don't flip. Now I'm going to open it up and see how it looks. Okay, that one's pretty good. It's off by a tiny bit, but not much. And that one is great. So if that one's bothering me, I can go ahead and just adjust it a little bit. If not, I could sew the whole length of the seam. I think I am going to take a minute to just take it out and adjust it because it's not that much work to take it out because I only sewed a tiny bit of my seam here. And at this point, I've worked so hard to create all these great points that I really want to make sure that they all shine through in the finished project. So just take those threads out, and I could do my hang pin again, or I can kind of eyeball it. I'm not sure why it didn't line up the first time, so I'm going to kind of eyeball it this time and just double check and make sure everything's where I want it to be. And there we go. That's better that time. So now what I'm going to do is sew the length of the seam, and I'm just going to leave those threads in as kind of pinning. They're not going to really be in the way at all. And I don't need to backstitch at the beginning and the end of this because I am going to be putting my border on. And when I get to these intersections, I do want to make sure that I sew right over the threads that are already there, even if that means a little scant or a little generous, because those threads tell me exactly where I want to be to perfectly have my points. And so now that looks great, and I'm going to go ahead and add my third block. So with this block, I'm just going to go ahead and sew without doing the hang pin, and we'll see how it turns out. And it'll just give you an idea of there's multiple ways. I do generally, though, always sew the small areas before sewing the full length of the seam, because I have just found that when I sew the length of the whole seam, inevitably something ends up off and I have to take it out, and I don't like doing that. Line those up. And before I sew this, I just want to kind of do a close-up to show you. This is a perfect example. From my yellow point to my raw edge is definitely more than a 1/4 inch. And from my orange point to my raw edge is definitely less than a 1/4 inch, because things happen. So instead of worrying about getting a perfect 1/4 inch at this point, I want to make sure I get that point to line up with that point, because no one's going to see in my seam allowances of my finished project. What they are going to see is the front, and that's where my points are going to show. And there we go. Points lined up pretty good on those. So I'm going to finish sewing that seam. And once I finish sewing this seam, I'm going to head on over to my iron and press both of these seams open. Now that my center is complete, it's time to sew my 2 long borders on. And normally when we have something small sewn onto something big, we sew from the small side so we can keep track of it with the bigger piece underneath. But in this case, we're very concerned about our points. So instead of sewing with our border on top, we're going to flip this and we're going to sew with the center of our quilt on top. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin at all of the points, and then I'm going to sew from this side of my table runner. And I'm simply going to line up my vertical seams from all of my squares with each other and place 1 pin at each intersection. So I have that all pinned, and I'm just going to go ahead and sew my seam here. And I want to keep in general a straight 1/4 inch seam, but what I'm going to focus on is every time I get to an intersection, making sure that I am landing my needle into the point exactly where the point of my star is. So that way I don't end up cutting off any of my star points. And I don't need to backstitch at the beginning and the end of my long borders. I do need to do that for my short borders. And as I've mentioned before, never good to sew over pins. So I'm going to take them out as I go and just nice and slow. And again, this is another place where a stiletto can come in handy to keep everything nice and flat and exactly where you want it. And these seams are less important where there isn't star points, but we still want to keep our border even so it doesn't get all wavy, and so we want to do our best to line those up as well. They just aren't as visually going to stand out if they're off in the finished project. Make sure none of my seams flip over. I'm going to use my stiletto to hold this end piece together. That looks great. They're not all perfect, but they're pretty good. If any of them are really off, I would probably take it apart. That one's kind of borderline. It's under 1/8. I'm probably going to leave that. If it bothered you, you could go ahead and take it off. And I'm going to follow those same steps to go ahead and sew both of my long borders, and then you can press your seams here to the border if you prefer, or open at this point. Sometimes people find it easiest to press away from these points and find it difficult to press these open. So at this point you can go whichever way you prefer, out to the border or open. And then once you have the 2 long borders, go ahead, follow same steps to put on the short borders and make sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end of the short borders. Thank you for joining me here this week to make the apple pie table runner. I hope you have enjoyed the process of learning how to make the Lazy Angle 2-step block, turn those into stars, and then make a table runner using a charm pack. If you've enjoyed yourself, please be sure to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. If you have not yet signed up for the Sew Along emails, you can do so at the link posted in the video description below. The next project in our Sew Along series is the Stargazer pillow, and we are going to begin working on this next week. This is a 3-step block using the jumbo Lazy Angle ruler, and I'm excited to show you how to make this next week. See you soon.